Welcome to M&A Plus, the art after the deal, where integrators are the heroes. We are here to explore the details and strategies that shape the successful transformation of mergers and acquisitions beyond the initial agreements. Today's episode is called Transforming Futures, a deep dive with Phil, the AI futurist and complexity scientist. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from an amazing transformer, Phil Abraham. Phil is a complexity scientist, AI futurist, and inventor. He is a transformer and integrator in the most complex environments imaginable. Welcome to the show, Phil. So glad to have you on. I've heard you speak, and I remember hearing so many interesting stories about the evolution of technology, logistics, security, and supply chain, working with Walmart, Kmart, and General Motors. That was just the beginning for you. Now you're helping solve the most complex problems for companies as technology, blockchain, and AI evolve. So let's get started.
Okay.
So, Phil, tell us about your early days. What was the foundation that made you the expert that you are today?
There's an article out there called From the Rafters to the Cloud, and I always try to get people to go Google that article and read it because it's about an 8-page article and it kind of lays a nice groundwork for how I started. When I was in 6th grade, I ran away from home and I lived in the rafters of a garage and never moved home again. And I got into deep technology and complexity science and disruption, and I never turned back. So it kind of started there around 6th grade, and which was 100 years ago, and stayed in it ever since.
So you lived in the rafters. So what were you doing in the rafters to make were you studying or were
It's a weird thing. I was a captain of the basketball team. I was vice president of the National Honor Society. I walked to school like all the other kids, but things just weren't working out that well at home. And that's where I moved. And, it was probably the best time of my life. I was able to be in a, safe environment, and I had a lot of time to think. And it really played into my creative side of my brain. In hindsight, it was a good launching pad for me.
Okay, so it was the environment. So were you in school? Like how old were you at this time?
I was summer between 6th grade, 7th grade.
Oh, okay.
So whatever age that is. And it's been 100 miles an hour from that day to today.
Oh, okay.
Nonstop.
Okay.
I mean,
so you would have been like in maybe junior high and then high school.
Our junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. So I was just about going into 7th grade.
Right. So what kind of student were you in high school? Like what were you doing in high school?
Just so people have some background, I have a really bizarre twist to me because I'm this really good person and I work well with others, but I've never had a normal life. It's really been, full blast all the time. High school was fun and I snuck in some study time and everything. And I loved school because back then you didn't have the internet. So if you wanted to hang out with your friends, you had to go to school. It's the only place you could see them. So I loved going to school a lot. I mean, they couldn't get rid of me. And I goofed off a little bit in school and I studied a little bit. And so it was a good place for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember I remember the late 80s, early 90s when email was just getting popular. When I started going to college, actually in the early 90s, I guess it was late 80s. I mean, what do you remember about that? What was your impression about email back then?
Oh, I have actually every day I think about that era because I was heavily into technology, but they didn't really have a technology space. I was doing stuff before Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. People don't understand that. I actually was migrating, and we'll get to this in a second, but the largest retailer in the world was Kmart, and I moved them to the cloud pretty much before there was a cloud. And in that article from the Rafters to the Cloud, they talk about how much trouble I got in when I did that because I didn't realize they're a publicly traded company and I was supposed to check in and ask questions first, But I skipped that. I just went and
Right.
did it. But that era is fascinating because during that time period, none of my neighbors had, garage door openers. Of course, my older brother was a lawyer. I remember he got a car phone, which was about as
Mhm.
big as a shoebox. And I was just fascinated with this technology. But there really wasn't any technology. Most people had refrigerators and things like that, but a lot of people didn't even have central air conditioning and things like
Right.
that back then. And so I was keenly primed, and my parents, who were incredibly intelligent, they had
Mhm.
primed me for this as I reflect back. So I was bred for this moment. So I was always eyes open,
Mhm.
looking for new technologies, tracking it during that period because there was an
Okay.
explosion of activity.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the cloud. So I don't remember hearing about quote unquote cloud until way later. So you obviously knew about it before. So when did the cloud actually become a cloud?
Well, we can Google the actual date, and I've been meaning to Google the actual date, but I have a better answer than that for this.
Mhm.
The truth of the matter is, it looks like the largest migration to the cloud in the history of the cloud was done by me at Kmart. Now, that doesn't include some really smart people, maybe in the Pentagon or somewhere, somewhere in the world. Maybe somebody was working on something secret. But for us regular people down here on Earth where I live,
Mhm.
I think it was the largest migration in the world because Kmart was what we consider today an Amazon or Google. It was high tech, it was huge, it was big,
Mhm.
and there was no internet or cloud, and I moved it to the cloud. So there was just a kind of a baby level of the cloud that like real
Mhm.
smart people at U of M in Ann Arbor or MIT that were working on stuff like that. And I breezed by that, blew by
Mhm.
that, and said, wow, I'm going to take this whole company and move it away from itself.
Mhm.
That's what I was thinking at 18 years old. I said, I'm going to
Mhm.
take this company and just take it. You know,
Mhm.
today I would have been arrested and labeled a terrorist because I literally went into the company and I took the company away from itself and from its shareholders. I didn't check in with legal. I just did it.
Oh. Mhm.
And so since technology was at its infancy, and back
Mhm.
then all the people in the office, they had in and out baskets, which the younger crowd, they don't even know what that is, right? But they had in and out baskets. So I was over there saying, I'm going to do this.
Mhm.
And I went and did this.
Mhm.
Okay. I got kind of in trouble, but back then you only got like a little spanking because they didn't understand we didn't have Homeland Security and all these other things. But
Mhm.
it was definitely tiptoeing on the edge.
Right. So I would like to hear a little bit more detail about like what exactly did you do when you say you took Kmart and you took it away from itself? What does that mean?
Okay. And before I say that, I just want to, as a teaser, when I ended up in grad school, I did my thesis paper on running companies without software, eliminating IT
Mhm.
departments, making complex corporations disappear. Okay. So I
Okay.
formalized my life and later.
Mhm.
So, at Kmart at the time, being this, very intelligent creature at that time, they're no longer, but then there was a massive amount of work that had to go in every day to make that company function. So, for example, today, Amazon, you go on Amazon.com, you say, I want to order something, you click on it, and they deliver it to your house. It's a lot easier. Okay. Well, back then it was very manual. So Kmart had 3,000 stores and they were huge stores. And since there was
Mhm.
no internet, everybody had to walk into these stores, pay cash to buy something with people at cash registers. There's a lot of administrative bookwork and stuff like that. And so even though it was very advanced, it was archaic compared to today.
Mhm.
And in order to process 3,000 stores orders, and remember, and this might seem boring, but it really isn't, there's about 130 SKUs. So one item, right-handed baseball gloves would be an SKU, stock keeping unit, and a left-handed glove would be another unit. So there's about 140,000 SKUs in a typical Walmart or a typical Kmart store. And then these 3,000 stores, the store manager would go through their store, And they would order, say, oh boy, we need, basketballs, baseball gloves, shampoo, whatever. And they would get on the phone and call these orders in to Kmart headquarters. So you got 3,000 store managers calling these massive millions of orders every day.
Mhm.
Then don't
You're talking
forget,
about calling on the phone.
yeah, calling on the
Okay.
phone and they go, hi, I'm Lisa. I'm the store manager of this store in New
Mhm.
York City. And you'd have a book, 3-ring binder. And you go through departments like
Okay.
ladies area or
Mhm.
sporting goods, and you'd flip through each department in the store and you would just run through it. I need
Mhm.
this, right? 140,000 items. So then all these orders would show up like, I don't know, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, whatever, these orders would pour in. The Kmart headquarters would be sitting on a mountain of orders. And remember, being a publicly traded company, Wall Street, New York investors, pension funds, they're all invested in Kmart and they want to know what those orders are because they're going to buy more stock, they're going to beat the company down,
Mhm.
boost the company. There's a lot going on depending on this. And it drives the whole company, the distribution centers, the warehouses. Are we going to have orders to pick and load in a truck? Advertising, are we going to advertise things? What the hell is going on here? It's
Mhm.
utterly mass chaos. And,
Mhm.
and then let's say you get through that process. Okay. All right. So now what do? Well, let's just say, using you as an example of your store in New York, let's say you ordered 2,400 boxes of stuff. The cubic foot of each box is some number. And when you put those 2,400 together, let's say Lisa orders the equivalent of 3,000 cubic feet. Well, the truck only holds 2,000. So now what do? So you got that going on for every order in the country. And the distribution centers, everybody has to know every square inch, every cubic foot, every item, everything's got to be mapped out. It's chaos times a million. So I took that whole process. So we had calculator, pen, and pencil. You'd have to say, well, Lisa ordered 3,000 cubes. We got to find a
Mhm.
way to split it at 2,000, which was another mathematical problem. And we still have 1,000 cubic feet of Lisa's stuff. What do we do with it? Well, we can't put her New York store on with the store in Dallas. Let's find another New York store. But that New York store has to have less than 1,000 so we can marry the two up. And none of that ever works out,
Oh, okay.
because there might be a
Mhm.
store close to yours, but they order 2,800. So it's problem on top of problem on top of problem at massive. And they were all over the world, Kmart,
Mhm.
not just the United States. And it involves ocean going ships and railroads and trucks, and everybody's waiting on this stuff. And it boils down to one guy, right?
Mhm.
One person. I was that guy. And we
Mhm.
were called the routing and batching. It was the nerve center for everything. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that job every day, pencil, paper, calculator. And if you make a
So what
mistake,
was your title? Like, I'm just curious, like, what was your
well,
title
I
at the
started
time?
off working in the warehouse, and you'll see in Rafters of the Cloud, this lady took me out of the garage and made me move in her house. And
Mhm.
she was the assistant to the chairman of the board at Kmart. And on
Oh.
Saturdays, she
Mhm.
would take me to work and he would babysit me. I had the chairman of the board at Kmart babysitting me while she went and did work. And I was sitting in his office like this, like an altar boy, right? And just sitting there. And so he got me into the warehouse and I was unloading trucks and stuff like everyone else. And there was an opening because whoever held the title routing and batching,
Mhm.
they got fired. Because if you didn't do it right, you shut the store division down, the warehouse's distribution, sale, everything's a mess. So you wouldn't last because you couldn't do the math quick enough. You couldn't split the cubes and figure everything out. It
Mhm.
was so then one day they came up to me and said, Phil, you want to be the routing and batching person? You can work up front in the office and wear a tie. And I said, oh, yeah. And I was going to school at night. My parents said, wow, you're doing really good. I said, thank you. So I was doing this task and it was very hard. And one day I said, remember, we didn't have desktop computers either. One day I
Right.
was doing this job and I had this idea. I said, I'm going to put all the Kmart store numbers, they had 4-digit numbers. I'm going to put the Kmart store numbers on a TV screen, all of them.
Mhm.
And I'm going to figure out and program into the system that I know generally Lisa's store normally matches up with Mike's store down the street. And I know that, the cubic foot should be for this size trailer, 2,000, this one, 3,000, this one, 1,000, whatever. All that. Long story longer and less interesting. I automated and made it disappear with one push of a button. So
Mm.
I took that whole thing and all the accounting and financials for the company that support that hot mess. And with one push of a button, poof, it did all the routing and batching for the whole system. So they had somebody like me in all these locations
Mm-hmm.
stressing out, trying to take 8 to 9 hours for each routing and batcher to do it. I
Mm-hmm.
did the whole company in less than 1 second.
Wow. Okay. What year was that?
That was roughly 1980-ish, 81,
Okay. Oh,
82.
wow.
And
So
now,
early.
by
Yeah.
the way, now watch this. You want a bigger wow? Here, I'll give you a bigger wow than that. Matter of fact, I got nothing but wows for this
Okay.
podcast.
I know.
Uh,
That's
yeah,
why we want to talk to you today.
check this out. So I am the founder inventor, and this isn't about me. I'm just trying to add on to the story. So what happened
Mm-hmm.
after that? Well, first off, I got in a lot of trouble. Well, first off, I'm working the night shift, and the security guard called me. He said, "Mr. Abraham, I have Bernard Faber on the phone for you." And I knew that was the chairman because he used to babysit me. And
Mm-hmm.
he goes, "I think you're in trouble." This guy said. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay, send him through." He goes real calmly, "Phil, Bernard." I go, "Hi, Mr. Faber." He goes, "I've got the store division yelling at me." It was like about 8 o'clock at night. Everyone's going crazy. And we tracked it to you. I said, "Tracked what?" "All the store orders are gone. Everything disappeared." I said, "Oh, don't worry, Mr. Faber. I took it somewhere better." Next thing I know, the guard says, "Phil, your boss, Mr. Hendricks, is at the gate. He had to come back into work and he's very mad at you." And he came in the office, said, "Come in my office." He yelled at me straight for 15 minutes. Thought the world ended. He made me promise I would never do that again. I did it for 25% of the company. And I
Mm.
tried to explain, "Mr. Hendricks, I just improved the profitability incredibly. Don't ever do it again." I said, "Okay." I went back to my office. You know what I did? I did the other 75% that night. I did 100% after I promised my boss I wouldn't do it again. Okay. So they didn't know what to do with me. However, I, through that process, invented what is now called manugistics. Manugistics today, about 40 years later, believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
is the number one supply chain software in the world. It gets even better. So after they beat me up and everything at work, I got promoted down to Ocala, Florida to lead the best distribution center Kmart could put together. And that led to me being grabbed by Walmart. And then I redid
Mm-hmm.
Walmart. But anyways, Kmart got over me. They gave me a trophy and a plaque and award. And okay, we love you now. Okay. Somebody, which I found out later who, somebody took my software and they sold it to someone. Now, remember, back then we didn't have lawyers, we didn't have IP, nobody understood this stuff. We just went to work. That's all we did back
Mm-hmm.
then. We went to work and some of us went to school at night. That was it. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing else. That was about as sexy as it got, right? Cut to a couple years later, I'm working for Tom Monahan at Domino's World Headquarters, and a guy says, "Abraham, come down to the auditorium right now." And I said, "Why?" He says, "There's this lady up on a stage and she's trying to sell a big software to Domino's. Come see her talk." I go, "I don't want to go see her." "Come see her." I walk in there. As I walk in, the lady says, "Manugistics was invented at Kmart. And if it worked for Kmart, it certainly worked for Domino's." And
Mm-hmm.
I basically started crying, to be honest with you. I'd never in my wildest dreams knew that invention was now going all around the world. It went from 0 to 200 million a year in sales the first year. And no one told me about it. I got sent down to Ocala, Florida, and I was kicking butt down there. I was doing insanely cool stuff. Okay. But now I'm at Domino's working for Tom Monahan at Domino's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And my software is being sold all around the world. And I was stunned. Well, about maybe 10 months ago, Panasonic announced, maybe it was a year ago, I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
They just paid $7.1 billion for Manugistics. Now, it went from me, somebody stole it,
Hmm.
they took it to market, they took it public, someone took it private, someone bought it, someone this, that, whatever. All kinds of money was made.
Hmm.
Panasonic pays $7 billion. And about 2 months ago, Panasonic announced that that solution they paid $7 billion for is now going to be the supply chain operating system for the world. They just announced that.
Oh,
And I've
wow.
written letters to their corp counsel,
Hmm.
their CEO, and everyone and said, hey, no one asked me. I'm the founder.
Hmm.
You can Wikipedia and everything. It's all out there that I'm the founder of it. So that system
Hmm.
today in 2024, a big company called Panasonic has taken it all around the world. It's
Hmm.
utterly insane. Yeah.
So what is it called again?
Manugistics,
So what
which,
happens if you Google Manugistics?
well, it'll probably, you'll see stuff. Well, if you Google and Wikipedia shows up, it'll say it was created by Phil Abraham. And then
Hmm.
ultimately it ended up in the hands of Blue Yonder, and Blue Yonder with Manugistics got bought by Panasonic. That's where it sits today in
Hmm.
their hands. And since they
Right.
shelled out $7 billion, they've got to show a return on investment. So they made this brash statement. It's going to be the operating system for the world. And that's like Phil 1.0, and I'm on like Phil 10.0 right now.
Right. I was going to say, I mean, how has it evolved since the
Well, I'm
beginning?
just, if we have the time today, we'll get into, the stuff I'm working on. Stuff I'm working on now
Hmm.
is insane.
Yeah.
Makes everything I just laid out seem boring, including I've been in, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. I've been working on ASI, there's 4
Hmm.
levels of artificial intelligence: machine
Right.
learning,
Right.
artificial narrow, artificial general, and artificial super. So I've been working on that. But more
Hmm.
importantly, this process, I became an expert in complexity science. And you'll never
Hmm.
achieve ASI, artificial superintelligence, until you master complexity science, which is the ability to predict, a year out with
Hmm.
north of 95% accuracy. And you can only get to that level of thinking until you've cataloged and identified every disparate system and every disparate database and every disparate software system in the world, and then interconnect all the thoughts and ideas and the correct answers. That's what I'm deep
Right.
into.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
So before we get to that part, so what about General Motors? Like what happened there?
Wow. So yes, I was in grad school at Eastern Michigan University, and I was in my first semester. And I got a letter, which is in that article from Rafters to the Cloud, from the vice chairman, Harry Pierce, who also was the head of corp counsel, and they have a very big law firm, law department, but he became vice chairman. And he sent a letter to my house and said, we're very interested in your thesis paper.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is they could have went to MIT, they could have went to all these fancy schools, but they grabbed me because I had this weird thesis. I said, I'm going to make companies disappear and software disappear and IT departments disappear. And so I ended up meeting with Mr. Pierce, and he said, Phil, Wall Street's all over my butt, he said, because they're tired of us bringing in 200 billion and giving out 200 billion. Because generally GM and Ford, they never really made a profit. They'd make $1 billion one year and they'd lose money the next year. So they're just exchanging dollars all the
Hmm.
time. So apparently Wall Street got on Harry Pierce and said, you need to change this. Somehow he found me because I said, I'll make the whole company disappear. You want to be profitable? So I'm in his office. And if you want pressure, walk into the former head of corp counsel for GM, who's now vice chairman, who was a Marine fighter jet pilot. Okay. Walk into that guy's office if you want pressure. So I'm sitting in his office, and I'm basically a cake eater. I'm sitting there, working for Tom Monahan, eating pizza at Domino's Farms and all this stuff. Now I'm down in Detroit at General Motors. And I said, well, Mr. Pierce, I'm capable of making this whole company disappear, actually, with my research. And I can tell you your profit margins will skyrocket. So he brought me on, and I had a secret office somewhere, or they wouldn't let me leave my house because they didn't want anyone to know what I was working on. So I was working on 2 companies that were codenamed Project Vector and Project Sydney, which, by the way, my newest thing, Brilliancy Deep Tech, really is a modern day spin on Project Sydney, because we never got finished with Project Sydney because they didn't understand it. However, we created Covisint. So
Mhm.
Manigistics became this billion-dollar operation. My second invention, Covisint, which is now called, I can never remember the new name, Open Text, I think it's called now. So Covisint went all around the world. So every 90% of the food and retailers, McDonald's restaurants use McDonald's, Home Depot, Coca-Cola use Manigistics. Covisint, 100% of the world's automotive suppliers have to use Covisint. So if you're going to sell brake pads to Ford or GM, you got to go through Covisint. So Covisint was the first phase of making GM disappear. So in Covisint, what I created was a mechanism to take global purchasing and global supply chain, global vendor management into a portal, and then
Mhm.
go make it disappear. Okay. So Vector, Covisint, that was phase one, purchasing supply chain. Phase two was Sydney, where I made Vector and Covisint disappear.
Mhm.
They weren't really ready for that yet. So that's kind of what what I did at General Motors there.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Well, he actually
So,
said, go look at every process, practice, and procedure for every department in the world for GM.
mhm.
Go document that. That's how it started.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely want to talk about the evolution of like your thoughts on where technology is going and AI and all that stuff. But I also want to slip in here, since we are the M&A Plus podcast, and see if you have any thoughts about, if two very large corporations merge, say one bought the other, what your approach would be to, because I mean it's very, can be very complicated, right? With merging and integrating two companies' systems. So, what would your approach be to that, something like that?
Well, that's a great question, because, in my opinion, that's probably the most critical question there is in mergers and acquisitions. Keep it in mind, of course, the lawyers got to do their stuff, okay? That, paperwork, filings, whatever, right? And bankers and that are going to move money into this merger, and money's going to move from this bank to that bank. So yes, finance is going to do stuff. But really, to be successful or not depends on how you integrate. So if it's medium size or large, the challenge is there is just a gymnasium full of pinch points where the whole deal falls apart. There's a high probability that these mergers and acquisitions will fail if you don't address the integration part properly. And the problem with trying to do the integration properly, people don't really know how to do that. Of course, and I did work with McKinsey. So there's the McKinsey guys, and there's the Deloitte and the Price Waterhouse, and they'll sell a big multi-million-dollar deal to the M&A people to help do integration, but they don't really know how to do the integration. And why? Well, you've got to figure out, what if this company is using Oracle and this company is using
Hmm.
SAP? Well, Oracle's not going to leave and SAP's not going to leave because they're competitors and they're both entrenched, right? And what if one is using Amazon for some of their stuff and
Hmm.
the other one is using Ryder and Penske Logistics for some of their supply chain stuff?
Hmm.
It's very hard to integrate. Very, very
Hmm.
hard. So my approach is being able to educate the powers to be and the decision makers up front, that the way I look at this integration going, I map out in front of their eyes, these are the painful decisions that we'll have to make. And this is how the system will work better, and it will be more profitable and
Hmm.
add more
Hmm.
value to the experience if we follow this program. So I try to lay that out up front.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always about planning. It's always better to start out with a plan.
Yeah. And people
And
think they have plans, but
mhm,
go ahead.
I would agree. That's interesting that you said that.
And I want to talk about healthcare too, but go ahead.
Okay, well, that's, now is probably a good time. So yeah, healthcare in general. So
The reason why I talk about healthcare, I sorry to interrupt, but you got me all excited here.
yeah.
Because integration's key. Everybody knows healthcare is a hot mess.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Let's.
And let's talk about it.
Definitely
The
talk about
reason
it.
healthcare is a hot mess, not the doctors, not the nurses.
Mhm,
They're both doing a good job. Okay. But the environment that we lift up a doctor and nurse and set them in is a hot mess.
mm,
Okay. Cost out of control. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. At Ascension Health, the largest Catholic healthcare system, they have over, I documented 6,500 off the shelf software systems internally, and none of them are talking to each other. And
6,500, wow.
6,500, and they're not even two problems. They're not implemented correctly.
Mhm,
Of course, nobody wants to hear that because they build them millions of dollars, but they're not implemented properly. And then they're
mhm,
not integrated amongst themselves properly. So you have what we call a hot mess. And then there's about 250,000 systems outside of the hospital. So whether you're talking Cardinal Health, Medicare, Medicaid, Johnson
mhm,
and Johnson, all those
mhm,
players. So you have and none of their systems are implemented properly or integrated properly. So you have a hot mess on your hands. So Ascension said to me, hey, Phil, go document every software system in the entire US healthcare network. So I said, okay. And I did. And in that process, I said, oh my gosh, I know where the answer is. I can find the answer to anything I want in healthcare because I know which database. So somebody that sits in a hospital, they only have access to their systems in their hospital. I have access
mhm,
to every system in the world, and I can get any answer I want, and I can implement and integrate anything I want. So cut
mhm,
to this woman, Rafita Fike, who was the CEO of Loma Linda University Medical Center in Loma Linda, California. And that's one of 4 blue zones in the world. It's a real best system in the world as far as I'm
mhm.
concerned.
So what's a blue zone?
Blue zone is where if you want to live to be in your hundreds, and if you also don't want to have the normal illnesses that people get, as they
Mm,
age, 70s,
mhm.
80s, 90s, live in the blue zone. So one's in Italy, one's in Greece, one's in
Oh,
Japan, and the fourth one's in Loma Linda, California. And they do everything differently there. Well, Rosita hand selected me.
mhm,
So I'm from Detroit here, where everyone's eating Twinkies and donuts and not doing anything right. And now I'm in a blue zone, and I'm in front of this lady who's the toughest lady I ever met in my life. And she says, Phil, I'm turning over our whole suppliers, vendors, everything to you. Just fix everything. We're number one in everything we do here, but we're not number one in supply chain and vendors, things like that. So you have
mhm,
every department. So I had cardiology, orthopedics, very complicated pharmaceutical industry, and regular stuff, supply chain, logistics,
mhm,
purchasing, even food for the cafeteria. I had everything.
mhm,
And she says, I'm going to tell you another thing, Phil. I'm going to send a letter to the group purchasing organizations, the suppliers, the vendors, and I'm going to tell every one of them for the next year that Phil Abraham's here, they're not to get in your way, they're not to interrupt with you, and they're to do anything you tell them to do. That's what she did for me. So I went, wow. So now I'm sitting at Loma Linda University Medical Center, and people need to understand this is what integration will do for you. There's no hospital in America, if you look at their financials, can drive down their cost by 1%. And I've looked at every hospital in the country. They might drop IV drip bags by 8%, but they let everything go up
mm,
8%. So
mm,
it's just a game, okay? Keep everyone happy. And nobody can improve patient outcomes in the United States at any hospital. If you go to the centers, the CMS, where they gather patient outcome and improving outcomes, it's all flatline. It's all the same stuff. You'll see commercials on TV that says we have really good doctors and our emergency room is really clean, but they can't improve outcomes. I have the only known study that's referenceable and documented. So at Loma Linda,
mhm,
I went at my low end, I drove 20% of the cost out, 19% better. At the high end, I did 80% or 79% better. But more importantly, we demonstrated that we improved patient outcomes without touching doctor, nurse, and patient. And that in turn improved reimbursements. So it was the most phenomenal case study on integration anywhere. And of course, I've spent the rest of my life since then going to
mhm,
every hospital in the country trying to get them to understand there is a better way to improve outcomes, not disrupt doctor nurse patient
mhm.
relationship. and drive cost out. And it boils down to one word: integration. And it's been proven out there.
Mhm.
So it's a phenomenal exercise in integration.
Right. Maybe now we can talk about the future. So what is going on today? Like,
Wow.
where do you see things going? How do you see things improving? How is AI? I know this is a loaded question. How is AI? I mean, AI is like the big topic constantly right now. So, I mean, what is your view on this development?
Thank you. It's another great question. It's very interesting because we have some competing really big things going on. On one hand, President Biden has mandated ESG, environmental, social, and governance, which is a fancy term for the carbon footprint. How do we make our environment better? All the way down to what do the farmers put in soil? And how do we trace and document that so people know what it is they're eating instead of just here's your steak? Now you can look at a QR code and it'll tell you that that cow was given this kind of fertilizer and this
Mm,
type of water, whatever. And so this carbon mandate, it's very interesting because they're also saying it's got to be intertwined with smart contracts and ideally orchestrated smart contracts. And it's got to be on a quantum encrypted blockchain too, because lawyers and accountants want to audit stuff down the road when
mm,
things get
mhm,
hairy, if the government sues you for not being in
mhm,
compliance. And if you park it over on a blockchain, they can go there and audit what you did
mhm,
without messing with the company fudging the data they give the
mhm.
auditors, right? And so
Right.
blockchain's important. So I went out and created the only known quantum encrypted blockchain in the world. So I didn't create this quantum mathematical algorithm and I did not create this one particular blockchain. But I did this research and I said, wow, I found the best blockchain, and it is by far the best blockchain.
Mhm,
And I found the best mathematical algorithm. And to give you an example, the gold standard for cybersecurity, and I'll get to AI in a second, is
mhm,
AES 256. If you can get to AES 256, that's like getting an A plus in school. You're great. Well, AES 256 gets hacked all day long. All you got to do is look at the news. Everyone's being hacked all day, every day, everyone. Pentagon, you name it. Ours is trillions of trillions times AES 256. And then we took that algorithm, we parked it in a blockchain. So now we have the best blockchain with the best quantum encryption. And now we're wrapping insane, I'm in the process, it's quiet right now, but I'm wrapping insane artificial intelligence into that variable as well. So we're in this world now where we're like, oh, okay, the government's mandating stuff like ESG and all that. And they want smart contracts. So, by the way, on these smart contracts, for people to know, you can write, it's a living document now, not a hard
mhm,
copy paper sitting on your desk. So, if the third paragraph of the contract says, if Phil does X, cut him a check for $5,000. So, you don't have to check with people anymore. The system is
mhm,
orchestrated to do that in a smart contract and then parked on a blockchain. And by the way, the reason the government is quietly going to smart contracts on a blockchain is most people don't know about the SolarWinds hack a couple years ago. It's the worst hack in the history of our country, and it ruined every database in the whole United States government. For example, it changed all the information in legal contracts. It changed all the information in accounting databases and bank statements. So nobody
mhm.
can prove what the hell was in that contract because a hacker went there and changed it all. Well, in
Right.
these smart contracts parked on a blockchain, that stops that
Mm,
from ever happening again. Very
mhm,
smart. You got to take lawyers, mergers and
mhm.
acquisitions, and integration much more serious and pile this stuff on top of
Yeah.
it. Now, as far as AI is concerned,
Mhm,
this is going to be crazy. I mentioned earlier we have these 4 levels. We all know machine learning, level 1. And now everyone knows about Chat GPT and all this
mhm,
sexy
mhm,
stuff, right? Look how cool it is. And it's level 2. Well, my research says that ChatGPT and its infinite wisdom, and keep in mind, yesterday Amazon announced they just spent $7 billion to buy a 25% stake in some AI startup company.
mm.
Amazon's in it,
Wow.
Microsoft,
Mhm,
Google, Elon Musk, they're all in it. But the problem is the AI they're serving up really isn't level 2, like they're saying. It's 1.25 is what I give it. So they're calling it 2.0 and everybody's going gaga over it. Okay. But it's really 1.25. It's technically still one, but I give them
Mm,
0.25 extra
okay.
for make it a little easier to use. And so
Mhm.
1.25. And they're starting to brag and talk about level 3 artificial general intelligence. They're not going to really be able to get to AGI because if they do, the world as we know it today will absolutely end and be recreated in a way no one will even know how to function, to be
Are you
honest with
talking
you.
about when we get to level 2?
Level 3,
Oh,
artificial
level
general.
3. Okay.
Level
So, like,
2, yeah.
I mean, in like layman's terms, what's the difference between level 1 and level 3?
Okay, well, I'll tell you, it's funny you bring that up because I have a patent lawyer who's doing some patents with my name on it. And one of the things that I gave him, this information I gave him to add in to the patent, is we shouldn't have 4 levels. I really think we should go level 1 to level 4
Mm,
myself, okay? Because the difference between 1 and 2 is it's nebulous, right?
okay.
And the difference between 3 and 4 is nebulous because if you can get to level 3,
Mhm.
the world ends. You remember the scientists say
Mhm.
the true definition of level 4 artificial super intelligence is the end of human civilization. That's the
Mhm.
real technical definition of ASI level 4 is all humans disappear. Okay. So that's the path. You want to know the path we're on? Where the path we're on is
All
level
humans are going to
4.
disappear.
All humans, that's the end of humans. Okay.
Hmm.
And that's not me telling you, that's what the brightest scientists in the world are saying. So level 4, there's a little bit of an issue there, right? Okay. And so you have level 1, and you got this 2 and 3 in the middle. And so my research, since I've been working
Mhm.
on level 4 for many, many years, you cannot achieve level 4 unless you achieve expert level in complexity science. Because if you don't have
Oh,
access to all the right answers, you're going to reproduce bad answers, right? Or answers that aren't supported with real facts and truths. And
right.
you
So
know what I
that's the
mean?
solution to keeping humans around?
Yeah. Now it's funny. I'm so glad you brought that up because in Brilliancy Deep Tech,
Mhm.
one of these companies that I have, which is a real spin on my life's work, in Brilliancy Deep Tech, we do a lot of cool stuff there. But the
Mhm.
one thing we do is we say we are smarter than AI. That's basically what we're doing.
Mm.
We're saying
Mhm.
bring AI on, we will beat AI. We will beat AI at AI. And we also
Okay.
say we are not friends with those that are going to perpetuate a tool that's going to harm people.
Mhm.
So we are the great, defense mechanism against that
Mhm.
AI. And the reason I created that was I saw that everyone said, "Oh, AI is so sexy and cool. Let's run over there and be with them."
Mhm.
Without understanding that it's going to harm humanity and it's going to do a lot of bad stuff and
Mhm.
chaos, a lot of chaos. So I created this Brilliancy Deep Tech, which says we're going to have to be smarter than you so we can keep you in check. That's
Mhm.
what we're doing there. So yeah, it's going to be cowboys and Indians
Well,
and
I mean, we could go down all kinds of rabbit holes and talk about all kinds of things around
yeah,
this stuff, and maybe in another episode.
that'd be
I
great. I
have
would
so many
love.
questions.
Go ahead.
So just in general, so how can AI and maybe blockchain assist integration? Like, is it assisting integration and is it helping and how does it help?
That's a great question. I kind of have a two-part answer. At one level, it will be incredibly, incredibly helpful. Okay. And so if we only use the incredibly helpful piece of AI working with integration, we all get an A plus on our report card. That's
Okay.
perfect. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
the way to go. Period. However, the problem is AI is inherently evil and inherently not good, right? Because it's not designed with good in mind. It's designed to really wreak havoc. So phase 1, it will help with integration. The problem is, watch this. Who inside the company is going to be the AI grandmaster that can keep AI in check? That's the problem integration's going to have. So if they had brilliancy sitting there as the big
Mhm.
watchdog, like in a courtroom, you got a judge because the defense
Mhm.
lawyer is really smart, the prosecuting attorney is really smart. but they need a judge there to say you're getting out of line or you're getting out of
Mhm.
line. Without that grand poobah master, puppet master watching the AI, you'll do well phase one, you'll do really
Mhm.
bad phase two.
Okay. As long as you trust the puppet master.
Well, then that's the
But
next
the
thing.
puppet
Okay.
master has to be trustworthy, right?
Yeah. And so, in order to have the trust you need in that puppet master for AI, you have to have someone that has been
Mhm.
vetted over many, many years, has the credentials and reputation. And as you go through those checklists, you won't get perfection, but you might be able to say, hey, this is about as close as we can get to perfection. We're going to hook our
Mhm.
wagon with this guy or girl.
Mhm.
That's the
Okay.
best we can do right
Yeah.
now.
Wow. Amazing.
And remember, if the guy isn't perfect, but maybe he's
Mhm.
close to perfect as a puppet master, at least you can signal to the AI companies, I do have somebody that's going to be our watchdog overseeing
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
It's like a corp counsel looks out for the company, right?
Mhm.
Might not be the best lawyer in the world, but that corp counsel is looking out on behalf of the company.
Mhm.
And that's what it does. Now you're going to need that person watching over the AI.
Right. Okay. Cool. Well, this has been a really interesting discussion. There's many things that we could talk about for lots of hours, actually. Let's do the last section here. So what are you doing today, and how can people kind of get in touch with you or reach you, and what kind of projects are you doing today?
I have several emails. Probably the easiest one is my pabraham6@gmail.com. So I don't have to list all my different emails. They can have my cell phone number and you can put all that out there. Very easy to get a hold of me.
Mhm.
Right now, today, I've got multiple startups going on, multiple projects going on. One of them is a woman owned business that's doing utterly phenomenal, crazy stuff. And I got insane cybersecurity stuff going on that I work with the three-letter agencies and stuff
Mhm.
like that. But probably the joy for me is my brilliancy work in deep tech. It's called Brilliancy Deep Tech, and we're taking
Mhm.
AI on head on. And that's
Mhm.
probably going to be the most exciting things. And I'll give you just one quick example as we wind down this show. So, what if you have a complex supply chain like General Motors? I'll just pick on GM because they're close here to my house. So, we got a
Mhm.
complex supply chain like GM. And somebody says, well, we're going to bring AI in there to run your supply chain. Really? You really think today's AI is going to be capable to deal with the nuances of these complex supply chains? It's never going to happen in a million years, but they're going to try and it's going to muck up these supply chains. So, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, well, let's build an AI tool. So, a little teaser for everyone.
Mhm.
I'll announce offline to you. Let's say another AI tool with a woman-owned AI company that's tied to one of the largest software companies in the world using Brilliancy's intellectual property to build an AI that can stand up against supply chains. So that's probably the most exciting thing I'm working on right now.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is.
Good. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you spending time talking to us today on M&A Plus, the art after the deal. I just wanted to let the audience know as well that we have a couple of upcoming episodes, one of which is going to be with a risk and compliance expert. And we've got another one that is actually merger and acquisition due diligence cybersecurity practitioner. So we're excited to talk to them as well. So thank you, Phil, for joining us. And I think that's it. We're going to close the show. Thanks again for joining M&A Plus, the art after the deal.
Thank you for having me.